Let's talk about the most common reasons air layerings fail and ways that we can fix the problems that arise. Late summer onwards is when we start to get really excited to check on the air layers that we placed earlier in the year to see if they've produced any roots and are ready to be cut off. But what if no roots have formed? To understand the issues that may arise with our air layers, it can be helpful to have an understanding of the science, but feel free to skip ahead to the next chapter if you're good. The vascular system of trees and shrubs is made up of layers from the core out to the bark. The main responsibilities of each layer are structural support, that's the heartwood, the transport of water and nutrients up through the vascular system to the leaves, the xylem. The growth of new vascular cells is carried out by the cambium. Transport of energy in the form of sugars and starches generated by photosynthesis is the responsibility of the phloem. Finally, the outer layer is for protection, and that's the bark. When air layering, we interrupt the transport of sugars and starches downwards. It gets stuck at the top cut site, builds up in the form of callus tissue, which is undifferentiated cells. Similar to our stem cells, they can become roots, foliage, whatever the tree needs. And in the right conditions, that callus tissue gives rise to roots. But what are the right conditions for roots to form? The main variables are health, moisture, air, temperature, and timing. The healthier the tree and branch being air layered, the more readily it will produce roots. The growing medium needs to supply the right balance of water and oxygen for the species being air layered in order for roots to develop. Roots develop best in warm average temperatures. If it gets cold overnight, less chance of roots. As such, the optimum time for placing the air layer for most species is going to be towards the end of spring, as that first flush of growth is hardening off. That's the science. Let's get into the problems. If you're finding this helpful, please leave a like and even a comment. It really helps the channel out. Issue number 1, the air layer develops rampant callus tissue formation but zero roots. This is usually caused by the growing medium staying too wet and without sufficient oxygen. To fix it, switch to a more airy growing medium such as your bonsai soil. Also, allow the growing medium to fully dry out between waterings until root growth is observed, then resume normal watering practices for that species. The root growth will often be explosive as a result of making those changes. Other causes could be the use of a rooting hormone that is too potent for that particular species, but if the conditions are good, roots will still form. So I'd rather have strong rooting hormone that isn't needed than to leave it out and regret it later. Share this video to a bonsai beginner if you think it could help with their air layer projects. Issue 2, the vascular system is insufficiently severed or is able to regrow, bridging the gap so the tree didn't need to produce roots. To fix it, recut the air layer and ensure that all the cambium, phloem and callus tissue is removed from the girdle before replacing the growing medium. To prevent the issue happening, ensure all the cambium cells are removed from the girdle, place a wire around to act as a barrier. You could even consider using knob cutters to cut a shallow trench around the girdle to ensure there's absolutely no chance that any cambium cells remain. Problem 3. Minimal or even no callus tissue develops at all. This may be caused by a few issues. The species, tree or even the branch may be lacking in vigour. So not enough energy is being produced to form the callus. Rooting hormone, which is actually a hormone that encourages the formation of callus tissue, can help, as can encouraging callus tissue to form the year before placing the air layer, which can be done by simply applying a wire girdle around the section to be air layered. The vigour of the branch and indeed the whole tree can be enhanced by allowing free growth, plenty of foliage to develop, doing no pruning and providing plenty of fertiliser to the roots at least one growing season leading up to the air layer and indeed during the air layer process as well. Problem 4, patchy or an inconsistent distribution of roots around the circumference. Some species tend to be prone to this. I find that crabapple or malus will produce a ton of callus but just one root which grows really thick and vigorous and the tree doesn't bother to produce any more. In that case, you can cut the root off and hope for a better distribution, or with just a few viable roots, the air layer can be severed with the intention of improving the nabari over time. This issue can also be a problem when air layering a horizontal side branch, where roots develop well underneath the branch and poorly on top. This is because roots know the difference between up and down and have evolved to grow downwards primarily. I find in this case that as long as there are enough roots to support the branch after its removal, and then the gaps fill in over time. Problem 5, you see gaps in the formation of callus and no roots. If there are areas in between blobs of callus where there is no callus tissue at all, this can be a sign that the cambium has died in that area, or it simply wasn't viable at that location when the air layer was applied. To prevent the issue when placing an air layer, ensure that there are no wounds that are unhealed where you're going to place the cut. No dieback has occurred, and the blade that you're using is really sharp so that all the cuts are nice and clean and there's no tearing or splitting of the cambium above the cut. To fix the issue with an existing air layer, use a sharp knife to recut the top of the girdle to encourage a more radial distribution, and evenly spread root hormone all the way around with no gaps. Issue 6, the section being air layered, or indeed the whole tree, dies as a result of the air layer process. Now, there isn't much we can do after the event in this example, but there are ways we can reduce the risk when we choose to apply our air layers. To achieve maximum health and vigour, we allow free growth, no pruning, a heavy fertiliser regime, remove and prevent all pests, adequate amounts of sun and water, and ideally as big a pot as possible, all growing in the ground, all this for at least one growing season before the air layer is applied, or until super strong vigorous growth is observed in the branch. Let me know in the comments what problems you may have observed and we might be able to see how to fix it. Take care and good luck. Thanks for watching.